scratching at the door. All right, I'm back. Let me get one other guy here. Need to get him in here or he'll be scratching at the door. He'll be scratching at the door. There you go. There you go. Yeah. He's in a nice, easy chair with a blanket.
Morning.
Morning, Jerry.
Good morning.
Well, afternoon for you guys.
Yeah, 12:30.
Yeah, just a question on the call to the San Diego station. Is the station that wanted to interview or whatever, is that the same station that's going to show these shows?
No, these shows are going to be on our Facebook and our YouTube channels.
Okay, so I need to mention that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, they'll have all that information.
Right.
They'll just want to talk to you. They'll want to do a Zoom meeting with you just about the mission and your remembrances of it and the kind of the neat stuff about it.
Okay.
Jerry's going on with them Tuesday. I was going to see if maybe Fred you could do something maybe before we launch on Friday.
Let's see, the time was at had to be, they suggested by 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time.
Yes.
It would be 11 here, and that's a good time for me because my caregivers here comes at 10.
Okay.
So looking ahead, I could do it on, let's see, I could do it on, how about, and the events are Friday and Saturday, 19th.
They're actually Friday and Monday.
Friday, Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, how about the 18th on, and I'll put it at 11 o'clock my time, which would be 9 o'clock their time.
Actually, I'd like to do it this week if we could.
Do it what?
Do it this week?
That's what I'm
Because
talking
we're
about. Yeah, I'm talking
we're
about
launching
the
on
11th.
the 12th.
The 11th. Thursday, I'm talking about
Thursday? Okay.
Thursday, the 11th. That's the day before Friday. Your first day is
Okay.
the 12th, right?
Yes. Okay, so Thursday, and I'll see what times work for them, and I'll try and do it earlier rather than later, okay? So like between.
But okay, just so you know, the times I've got to do it on that day would be between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock Houston, which would be 9 o'clock to noon. It has to be in that block of time.
Okay. Okay, so I'll see if they can do it in the 9 o'clock hour, our
Okay.
time.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I'm on with them at 8:45. I think that's my time, isn't it? 8:45
Yeah,
on Tuesday?
Yeah, tomorrow morning, so 6:45 our time.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
By the way, how is my picture coming through? Is it okay?
Looks great.
That was good.
Okay.
Very good.
I had a little trouble yesterday. We had a glitch in our fiber optic system out here in the country, and it was a little jerky. So, but they said they had it fixed, and I'm back. I'm measuring 50 megabytes per second here, so I think I'm okay.
That should be good.
I thought you said we got rid of Griffin. I thought he was not going to be in on this thing.
Yeah, that's all I do these days is work for Jim Kedrick at no pay. I get every year or so I'll get a T-shirt or a hat, and he wants to call it even.
I'll send you a coin or something. How's that?
Okay, hey, that's moving up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, there was a day when I still remember growing up as a kid when we stopped at Dick's Burgers and you got 5 burgers for $1. And they were like real hamburgers.
Wow, but that must have been those ones about that big.
No, no. I did not grow up in the land of, what are those ones called, those little ones called? White Castle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you used to
Yeah.
get, I don't
Okay.
remember you ever getting 5 for a nickel. I remember getting them probably about 5 cents a piece.
Yeah. Well, like I said, 5 for $1, and I thought that was and they were like real hamburgers. So
Okay. Well, no, that'd be about right. No, I got
Yeah.
actually I got them cheaper. I think at the time I'm talking about in the late 30s, were probably about a nickel or 10 cents for a little hamburger then
wow.
in the
Well,
white kitchen or whatever it was. Yeah.
well, remember when, you know, a candy bar was a nickel, and you know,
Tootsie Roll was a penny. The
That's-
little Tootsie Rolls.
that's exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you got a real live piece of licorice for a penny.
Right.
So how are you guys?
Good.
Okay, so Ruben,
I am.
Ruben, so we're gonna say, okay, Fred, can you light your face up more?
Gonna light. No, I got all the lights on that are on in this room.
Okay, I'm gonna show you
If
something.
I
I'm
put
gonna
the blinds on. I think it's too bright. Let me try that.
Yeah, we don't want the light behind you. Light behind you will make it darker.
Yeah, like Kedrick has.
yeah, so get rid of the light. Yeah, I do. You know what? It's because of the, I told Ruben today. Now I have engaged this. I'll show this when Fred gets, oh, that helped Fred.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, that helped a lot, Fred.
All right, that helped.
Yeah, that did. I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to bring it into view of the camp. See this light?
Yeah.
Okay. And so when we did an interview with Barbara Barrett, Secretary of the Air Force, you know, with the previous president, she had just some of the coolest lighting. And so her young aide, okay, much as I got to talk about the Air Force here now, okay, and her young aide did just that, literally put it in front of the camera so we could see what brand it was. And so I have 2 of them now where, watch this. And so I've got these little devices that I can change it, and it really helps depending on time of day, right, Ruben?
Right.
You just froze up.
Yeah, see,
At my age, I just assumed they didn't see the face too good.
well, I think we're all in that same category. And Jerry knows this, and I probably talked about it with you, Fred, you know, is that even I will be, I'm not really your son. I'm your younger brother.
Right.
How's that? And, you know, I will be 72 in July, and, you know, Andy, which you guys have met, Andy turned 70 April 3rd.
Okay.
And so it's, you know, it's, and she is, oh my God, she is just struggling with it. Oh my God, I'm getting older, you know? And I say, hey, the options are worse. So, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, I really want to say thanks to both of you for doing this. And Ruben is our tech guy. Along the way in the conversation, because we're going to edit it, okay, we could even, one of you could say, hey, break, let's stop for a second, and like, let's change directions, okay? Or Jim, come on and ask me this question, you know, because I hate to say this, you 2 were there, and the reason we're doing this is because you 2 were there, and that you're very skilled at the topic. And so, first of all, you know that I consider you both to be good friends, but we appreciate what you did at that time and what it's led to. You know, when somebody says Moon 2024, okay, well, they can look at a Fred Haise and a Gerry Griffin and say, hey, well, you guys, you know, paved the pathway that we live in. And so I'm very envious. It's really kind of funny because I didn't consider the space program at the time. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have made some different applications because sometimes the night carrier landings weren't as much fun as I thought they were going to be, you know. You know, especially as you got a little older, you went, you know, we used to call it a commander's moon. Okay. Yeah. And you tell the, you know, the schedule writer, okay, I'll fly Wednesday night. That'll be good. So.
Yeah, that it was interesting. A flight surgeon at Edwards who worked also with us at NASA there on the X-15 program. and instrumented the pilots to get heart rate and all that stuff. But he had also instrumented with a little bitty cigarette pack. He could record heart rate and EKGs and that kind of stuff. He put it on pilots in Vietnam.
Right.
And the highest rates, not when some of them were going up north and bombing up by Hanoi.
Right.
It was coming back and landing on a carrier at night.
Yeah. Oh no, I
Yeah.
knew about those studies, and you know, it was all true. You know,
Yeah.
it's like every so often, and I flew primarily the A4 and the A7. There were a few moments I wanted somebody to be in a back seat that I didn't have, just to say, "You look good. You look
Yeah.
good, kid." You know, you know, just kind of that. Okay, so.
Okay.
We're gonna start out, and it's gonna be I'm gonna go through it very quickly, but it'll be a little lengthy, just setting the stage, okay, for the two of you. Some of the questions I will say Fred, some I will say Jerry, some I won't say anything. That the expectation is you both would kick in with a viewpoint on that, and at least one of you is more polite than the other. I'm not going to tell you which. And like I said, the real treat is, you know, Ruben and I are with two people that I not only respect, but I genuinely like, and I think you guys are good guys. So, okay, so I'm going to start this off. Once again, if I hiccup, Ruben and I have done a ton of this in the past. He's used to fixing us. How's that? Okay. So one thing I do want you to know is that our entire goal is to make the two of you look spectacular, you know, on this topic, on this this honoring of 14. And you know, since we couldn't have some of them with us, the two of you are representing many people who made a special flight happen. And today we're going to talk about 14. So
Hopefully making us look spectacular also with the showings, get some revenue.
well, that's right. And by the way, Fred, Fredo, we really appreciated your question. Okay, you know, do you have to be hawking anything? Let me see. I've got some tea here. This is Trader Joe's tea that I'll be drinking, and I got some golf balls over here. I could maybe promo. During the show, you know, we'll put up little stuff that you guys will see in the final edition. It'll say donate to the Air and Space
Right.
Museum, and all that kind of stuff. We probably take the approach of trying to soft sell, believing that, funny as this may be, like when we did the Apollo 13 and all that, is that our joy and what we bring to others is, unfortunately during the pandemic, I shouldn't say this, but it's payment alone, all by itself. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we gonna all three be on camera at the same time?
You will.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
when Jim is asking a question, and if he directs it specifically to someone, then I will spotlight you. When Jim asks a question, everyone will be on screen.
Okay.
So you got that. So when you're answering, it'll be just you.
I was just wondering, I can't pick my nose and think I'm off camera, right? I'll be on camera.
Or tell us, pick nose, and then we'll then we'll stop. Excuse me. Then we'll stop.
Okay.
Or, you know, gonna clean out my ears, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks once again for joining us to Fred Haise and Gerry Griffin today. We're going to talk a little bit about them, but we're going to talk about Apollo 14. My name is Jim Kidrick, and I'm the president and CEO of the San Diego Air and Space Museum, and we're just absolutely thrilled to have these two gentlemen join us today, so we can talk a little bit about something that is near and dear to us, certainly space flight, okay, but an honoring of the Apollo 14 mission. So prior to Apollo 14, January 1971, NASA and Mission Control were certainly very experienced, having already overseen 21 manned space missions, including the 6 Mercury missions from 1961 to 1963. And of course, next was Gemini, as we get closer and closer to Apollo and their 10 flights from May 65 to November 1966. And by 1971, the new Apollo program was flying men to the moon, having already sent 5 manned missions to Earth's neighbor, and something that we all looked up at during our entire lives, saying, you know, it's time to go to the moon, and some might say it's time to go to Mars even after we go back to the moon. So we had Apollo 8, December 68, Apollo 10, May of 69, Apollo 11 and the historic first moon landing, July of 69, Apollo 12 and the second moon landing in November of 69, and of course Apollo 13 in April of 1970, a flight we will reference in this program, and certainly a flight very near and dear to both of our guests today. One is a flight director and the other is one of the astronauts. So by Apollo 14, NASA was a pretty well-oiled machine, and you know, especially and Jerry, you always talk about Chris Kraft, you know, and the ground team that had been developed. Flight Director Gerry Griffin and astronaut Fred Haise were important cogs in the wheel, and I'm going to tell you, by passing on the story and continuing as we do, and I just exited my video accidentally. Okay, so I'm going to say, so by Apollo 14, NASA was a well-oiled machine, and both of our guests today, Flight Director Gerry Griffin and astronaut Fred Haise, were important cogs in that machine, and remain so by ensuring that we don't forget any of that history. By the time 14 comes around, of course, Jerry had been a flight director on several Apollo flights, including Apollo 7, so important after the disastrous fire on 1 in 1968, and again on Apollos 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So Fred and Jerry have gotten to talk to each other more times than we care to discuss here. And the team of flight directors around you on Apollo 14, we had Peter Frank, Glenn Lunny, and Milt Windler, also veteran flight directors of multiple Apollo missions. Fred, by Apollo 14, you had already flown to the moon. On Apollo 13, an experience which proved crucial to some of the problem solving on 14, and we'll talk about that today, because your role, you know, as CAPCOM proved to be far more important than perhaps originally thought. Your role was certainly more important than we originally thought it might be. You also had served on the support crew for Apollo 9, the backup crews for Apollo 8 and Apollo 11. In fact, at one point you were in line to be the lunar module pilot on Apollo 11. You'd been in mission control during critical phases for Apollo 8 and 11. As was customary for the backup crew, you had trained to fly the missions and would be of great assistance if things went wrong, which occasionally would happen as they do in any phase of aviation or space. So for Apollo 14, January 71, you had trained for almost every same mission on Apollo 13 and had volunteered to be a CAPCOM and to be of assistance during the Apollo 14 mission. So when you factor in hundreds of backroom technical advisors who in turn had thousands of engineers to call upon, NASA truly had an all-star team, which you two were members of, on its hands in mission control for Apollo 14. So Apollo 13's impact on a 14, this is going to kind of set the stage a little bit on some of the things that Apollo 13 and both of you, by being involved with 13, helped you in what you were doing. Ruben will get rid of all that. There were lots of modifications to the command and service modules after 13. So we're getting to a question here, a real key question. Apollo 13, beginning with Apollo 14 and all the way to 17. They included the oxygen tanks were redesigned and a third oxygen tank was added. 5 gallons of stored water was added to the command module. An emergency battery was added to the service module. The monitoring systems on the spacecraft and at mission control were upgraded. Transferring power from the lunar module to the command module became easier. Okay, so Jerry, okay, and here we go. With all of these improvements and upgrades, did it remind you a little bit of the reset that NASA underwent after the Apollo 1 fire and prior to the Apollo 7 mission?
Well, it did have some of that. The thing that was different about it, of course, it wasn't quite as severe. And we didn't have any loss of life on 13, thank goodness. But there was and it was about half the time, by the way, to get from 13 to 14 as it was from 1 to 7 after the fire. So yeah, there was some similarity. We did all the changing in the command and service module. And we did make it better. Some people might say, when you read that list, which I'm very familiar with, that it sounded a little bit like closing the barn door after the horse was out. But we would have sure handled that next one. Had we gotten an Apollo 13 kind of a failure, we would have handled that pretty slick. And it was, it was an interesting time because one thing is we never wavered. There was never any thought of stopping, which actually the same thing happened after the fire. There was some naysayers, but by and large, the public, the Congress, the White House, all kept behind us. So by the time as you said earlier, very important point, Jim, we were pretty well oiled. In fact, we were pretty well oiled by the time we got to 13. And by the time we got to 14, we were ready. And then one final word, I think 14 started a pivot point. It didn't end it because those ended with 15, 16, and 17. But where we got more focused on exploration as opposed to the transportation system. Now, we had something yet to prove on those command and service module fixes, but they were pretty straightforward, and there was nothing that was dynamically different. It just gave us more capability. And so about 13, 14, 15 is in that time frame. Just like a test airplane, when Boeing builds a new commercial airplane, they test it a lot before they start flying passengers and getting revenue. In a sense, that's kind of the way the early Apollo flights were. We wanted to make sure we could get to the moon and back and do it without, killing somebody in the process. And, but by 14, I felt like, and I thought we were ready for 13. We really were getting into the exploration mode. Sure, we were trying to be safe and get out there and do it right, but we really started to focus on the science. And I don't know if Fred felt that change or not, but I sure did, that we were getting a lot better at trying to figure out why we were going to the moon and what we were going to do when we got there than we were early on.
That's great. Fred, same question, because, you think of the fire in 1, Wally taking the crew up in 7 and bam, 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 and you on 13. What were you feeling, in this 13 to 14 and all the modifications as it might relate to what happened to 1 to 7?
Well, Jerry said that the things they did, the added oxygen tank, and actually the emergency battery, I think was a Lunar Module Decent battery,
yep.
Came out of the accident investigation on 13. And frankly, if NASA, if it was a military vehicle, they would have followed mil specs. And those commodities like oxygen, the hydrogen, the critical commodities would have not been all clustered together. In a military aircraft, you want things on geographically separated. So any aircraft doesn't take out everything. And of course, NASA didn't worry about that. And that's what actually caused the problem to get more serious than it might have been had we followed mil specs in the design. But at any rate, a couple of other things they added that we had to wrestle with was storing the urine for a day and a half. We had to do some workarounds for that. So I think they added a vessel on board 14 that possibly you could do that. Another commodity we did not have was blank paper. we had no blank paper. So when we had to write down the very long, lengthy, for instance, power up procedure for the mothership, the capsule, we had to tear, I didn't, but Jack Swigert copied it, and he had to tear off backs and fronts of checklist books, which were blank, obviously, and he could number the pages, and that's how the procedure was copied down. So, a few incidental things like that that had not been thought of that we dealt with were added to just in case things went really bad again on 14. I felt the fixes themselves were pretty straightforward to address. The problems we had, should it happen again, they would have been in better shape to obviously stay powered up and get home okay. So I think that the manifestation of the problem we had was covered for 14, and felt confident in that respect. The vehicles would do the job.
Of all the improvements, what did you think was the most significant improvement?
Well, obviously the cryogenics to have it separated so you could preserve your fuel cells. The capsule and the service module, their main electric power was fuel cells, which depended on oxygen and hydrogen. And the only battery power was 3 small 44 amp hour entry batteries, which you had to obviously protect and preserve for entry time. So that was probably the major fix that made it comfortable in a sense of you could still keep the command module powered up and have everything operating normal to come back home.
Right. Jerry, what do you think the most significant one was?
Well, I think Fred hit it. The cryo, it was interesting how they did that third tank when they added it. They followed more like the mil spec that Fred was mentioning. They put it on the other side of the service module in a bay opposite, 180 degrees around. And the one thing they did, I thought that was pretty good, or very good, is that if you did lose those 2 tanks over on the other side and fuel cells, you could isolate that tank so that it was not connected to those 2. You wouldn't lose it. You could shut it off from all of that, and you could feed that O2 right to the command module. So it was not only more quantity, it was a little better arrangement on how, if you got into that kind of problem again, you could keep going. The battery they put in was, as Fred mentioned, was that one of those decent batteries out of the Lunar module, and they have 415 amp hour battery. It was a big horse. And so I think the fixes that when it all came up, between the cryo and the power, you pretty well got it there. And I was on the 13 guys that went out to Downey that helped fix it after 13, and it was a good improvement. But we really felt good about it.
So you're pretty much saying nobody's out there with a jump start for the car, when you're way out there. Okay, so the commander of 14, Alan Shepard, kind of the granddaddy, of the group by this time, one of the original Mercury 7 and the first American in space, aboard Freedom 7. His crewmates, Stuart Roosa, lunar module pilot Edgar Mitchell, making their first space flights. Roosa and Mitchell had joined NASA, in 1966 as part of the 5th group of astronauts. Fred, you spent a lot of time training with these guys. What were they like?
Well, I actually knew Ed quite a bit more because Ed and I spent almost a year and a half before we got our first crew assignments in testing of the lunar module. So I spent almost, lots and lots of hours with Ed through that process. Ed was obviously, because of that, as I was, very knowledgeable about the lunar module. We both had spent so much time we had tested not just the limb we were primarily working on was limb 3, which was going to be the first one to go to orbit. For a while, we were working limb 2, which was meant to be the first to go to orbit. But all the wiring changes after the fire to whole schedule, they just pushed it aside and jumped to limb 3 to stay on schedule. But we also tested limb 4, 5, and 6 because they were in the assembly line. So we tested all the limbs up through Apollo 10's limb, I guess. So Apollo 11's, right? No, let's see, yeah, Apollo 10's. So anyway, we were very versatile in that. Ed was a very highly educated. He was a PhD, so he was a very savvy, more so maybe in that sense of things, and had been very involved in science in a way that most of us, I guess, at the time had not been. Stu was in fact, both of them I knew from Edwards days through the Aerospace Test Pilot School, Chuck Yeager ran. And Stu was also out of that area and was, I'll call Stu was a pilot's pilot type guy. I had more time with Stu actually because on Apollo 16, when 18 and 19 got canceled, I inherited Stu and Ed to finish up the training assignment as the backup crew on 16. So I was with them every day. Stu was kind of guy who would be getting ready to do TEI, which is trans-earth injection. You know, it's kind of supposedly a very critical time. We're in the simulator with mission control. And Stu would start doing this drumming sound like Hollywood, you know, for a very tremendous event coming up. So he was a fun guy to be around. Al, for the most part, was a business-like. He didn't say a lot, and if you're on the wrong side, you didn't want to hear him say a lot. And but he was, I would say, particularly considering the time he had been since he had been in a training cycle. But for the age and when he jumped in it, because it's tough. It's a lot of hours, a lot of days a week, up to as you're getting closer to launch, 7 days a week even. He stood in there and did the job to get really ready. And incidentally, the landing he made was the closest to the spot the computer would have landed of all the missions. Now, wow. I can't say that was not just from piloting. Other missions had to move because of obstacles, where they might have landed, you know, equally as close. But he has had that distinction, so he did a real good job through the landing and where he placed it down.
Well, if I were him, I just would have said it was because of me.
Right. Oh yeah. Right. You're right.
So
he probably thought it.
That's right. Okay, so Gerry, okay, you worked with these guys. Give us your viewpoint of them also.
Well, very similar to Fred. We saw quite a lot of these people because they passed through as CAPCOMs. Now, Al did not, but because he was a boss by then, he was kind of at the top of the food chain in the astronaut office. And he and Deke were kind of Slayton were kind of the senior people that, but they were all in the control center a lot. And Stu and Ed were both CAPCOMs, got to know them very well. I can imagine, I didn't know that, but I can imagine Stu having the drum roll before TEI. He was always, I got tickled just looking at him because he had that impish grin that was just, I don't know, he was like a magnet to humor. And Ed was more serious, more studious kind of guy, but very, very calm. And the thing I remember about Ed is a gentleman, a real gentleman, very, very nice. Al, you know, with us, we had worked with him before he got finally at age 47, by the way, when he took off on Apollo 14. So we've been around Al quite a bit. He was always, as Fred said, he was businesslike, but he was friendly. I think he liked the flight control people, especially because he knew they were kind of watching out after the backs of his astronauts, and he was always, when we had a problem or something, he was right there and would nod his head whether he agreed with what we were going to try or not. But he was a pro. When I think of him, I think as a professional test pilot, very much kind of no nonsense. He had a impish grin too, that you, like Fred said, you didn't want to see the opposite of that, but the grin was kind of nice, and that kind of curling smile like most test pilots have, fighter pilots have. Very nice guy.
Well, you know, you talked a little bit about getting onto the science of the missions. And Fredo made a comment, you know, he's got the PhD, he's got Edgar there, a little more sciencey than the others. How about that?
Well, I think when we say science, in terms of the mission, the job was to be a good field geologist. To obviously, I was planning ahead based on the photography that was available, to kind of pick the traverse or the path you would follow, to pick the various units, rock units, and sampling accordingly to psych out the site. Of course, in 13 and 14, it was a pretty simple traverse. It was to explore Cone Crater. It was a feature in a little small hillock mountain range south of the Imbrium Basin. And it was thought that was formed by the big meteorite that hit and formed that big dark area, the Imbrium Basin, which I think some people think is the left eye of the face of the moon. And that splash material had poured out of there, formed those hills to the south. So by virtue of sampling in that area, and particularly Cone Crater, and to depth, you would get a picture of what came out of there at some depth on the surface. And the way a meteorite, when it hits, it has an upturn of debris. So if you're going, like in this case, they were going up slope, up the hill toward Cone Crater, the samples they were getting first would be from the deepest part. And really the rocks at the surface would be right at the lip of the crater. So it's kind of a backwards way of sampling, but it would give you the whole, if you sample correctly up the slope, would give you all the way to the depth of that crater. Now, actually, to give credit to Jack Schmidt, I would say the start of the lunar geology training that grew was on our mission on 13. We had time because the missions had stretched out after 11 on July. 12 didn't fly till November, and we had all the way to April. Jim Lovell wasn't intrigued with that. He was kind of like, still, we just need to be sure we can get there and back in one piece. And Jack arranged a meeting with a professor he had at Caltech named Lee Silver at a restaurant in Cocoa Beach. And Lee, he was a very gregarious fellow, easy to like, and talked Jim into saying, Jim, just give me one field trip with you and see what you think, and we can do more than if you agree. So that's what kicked it off, and we did considerably more than previous missions had done, almost up to within a month or a little over of our launch, doing field trips on 13. But Jack Schmidt was the guy who thought that we should do, we who were assigned the missions, should do more field geology work to become better observers and be more appreciative of the sampling we did in the protocol, and sampling to have good samples for people to analyze that we brought back.
Well, I think you're right. Everybody really gives Jack a lot of credit, you know, for the rock collection protocols. Now, I have to share this because it's still one of the funniest things I've ever heard, and it was from Charlie Duke. okay? Because as you're discussing here, you know, there was a great deal of time and energy and education and, you know, what we're looking for. And Charlie one time said to me, he said to the group, he says, you know, he says, I just picked up one of every color. And that would be the classic Air Force pilot, right? Isn't that what an Air Force pilot? Anyway, and the Navy guy wouldn't say that, but I still think that's just, you know, it kind of just makes sure that you cover it all. And because that protocol, as you describe here, was very, very important. Jerry, you know, when they're out there looking for rocks, okay, and, you know, they've got to be chatting with you guys about what they're seeing.
Yeah, and I didn't know that story that Fred just told about meeting in Cocoa Beach with Lee Silver. And because we took it to another level on 15, I was lead flight director, and Dave Scott, who was commander, said, hey, Jerry, you ought to come out on a field trip with us and kind of watch how we do this, because I think it would help, you know, the guys in the control center figure out what you can and can't do, and kind of, you know, just get into the science mode. Well, I went out there. I went to New Mexico to a site that looked very much like Hadley Rill on 15, and Lee Silver was there. And I struck up a friendship with him that lasted, well, still there, I guess. He's still alive. He was amazing. I can see why he was a renowned professor at Caltech, but he had this easygoing movie voice, and he was really good at it. But he taught me in 2 field trips a lot about geology and what to look for. Well, I went back and told Kranz about it and told other people. We ended up sending all kinds of leadership clear up to the headquarters level. Rocco Petrone went out, and I think it opened a lot of eyes. And now that's when the pivot towards science really came true. We were all much more focused on the science, and it did help us as we went through a mission. We had a back room that was full of science people, and they would ask for modifications to the plan, or they would ask us to ask the crew a question about something they had commented on. But by and large, the astronauts, in fact, Lee Silver told me that if he had had most of the astronauts that he trained in the field, if he had them for about a semester at Caltech, they could have probably qualified for a degree, either a master's or a PhD, because they were that good. They got into it and really studied the situation. And it is fascinating. I remember he taught me about slumps and tilts and all that. And I can't go into the hillsides anymore without looking for them. He got me started down kind of a path of interest in geology. And but I think the crews got very good at it. They were, particularly by the time we got to 17 and 16, 17, they'd been at it a long time and had done a lot of field training. And the control center guys, we ended up sending all the flight directors out on a field trip. And so all of us that handled EVAs after that looked at it differently.
Yeah, between my rookie early, not even a year, but that 9 months probably, I did 10 geology field trips, but also we only did 1 on 11. We made 1 trip is all we did on 11. Went out just east of El Paso. But then counting 13 training and 16, all total, I did over 30 geology field trips through the training for those missions, plus my rookie year. So
well, I'm envious of both of you, because you wouldn't know this, but I'm planning a ghost town, old mining towns and all that stuff trip for a bunch of people sometime in May. You are both invited, because if we can find gold, you know, or silver or whatever, I want you to know you're both in. So
Okay.
consider it an invite.
I want Fred on my side.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't want much of a cut, maybe, 60, 70%. Anyway. But I really am planning a trip. We'll start out with Bodie, California. We'll go anyway, all sorts of places. From my old days up in Fallon, because Fallon is like you're talking about, certainly. Fallon, Nevada. Okay, so launch day comes along. Okay, we got a 40-minute weather delay on the day of the flight. Other flights in the Mercury and Gemini program had been delayed, but this was the first launch delay of Apollo. Okay, and I know I've chatted a little bit with both of you on this. We'll start out with Fred. After everything that went wrong on 13, was this weather delay kind of an ominous sign when you're looking at from your angle?
No, I did not. Doesn't strike me that way. We were just faced with Florida, and
Yeah.
Florida has a tendency to sometimes have those days, thunderstorms, as we saw in 12, which was pretty bad with a lightning strike. And no, what didn't seem ominous. Certainly not from the standpoint of the mission eventually going and being successful.
Good. Gerry, you're an on-time kind of guy. Okay. You're looking at mission control. You're looking at all this stuff and clicking it off and the countdown's going on. What'd you think?
Well, I was the flight director for the launch of Apollo 12. If I learned anything, I learned that you don't want to launch if the weather's not right. So no, it was not in fact, I had been amazed that we had stayed on, all those missions had been launched right on time, and that we hadn't had a delay before 14. 14, we only delayed 40 minutes and then we went. And so it wasn't much of an impact. It was a nice launch that worked just fine.
Well, that's great. So pretty much the mood and mission control, and it was, pretty, hey, we're doing our job. Okay,
Yeah.
So what if Apollo 14 had missed the 4-hour launch window on January 31st?
Gone the next day or 2 days later. It depends on how far you were into fueling, as I recall, Fred. I think I'm right. If you got to a certain point, you had to offload a lot of fuel.
Yeah, we changed the plan. I think with 13 to launch not necessarily on the optimum day and time, but to have to go on a non-free return path that bought us extra days. Obviously, it had been extremely traumatic had it been a much longer delay, because the tanks had been filled, like the RCS tanks, and on the command module, service module, and command module. And there was, unlike shuttle, the command and service module, they were not built with what you call easy ability to drain the fluids. And they could not have afforded to sit in there for a month,
Right.
Without worrying about damaging seals. So they would have had to haul the whole stack back to the VAB and demade everything. And I'm not sure, they might have had to cut the lines to get the stuff out of there. And
As I recall, Fred, and I may be wrong here, but it seems like we finally got to a point, we had about 3 days where we could slip a day and go the next day, and then the next day. And then we'd start running out of and that's where that non-optimum trajectory came in, so that we could have some more flexibility. Right. But we would have probably just gone the next day in this case.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I'm just saying if somehow we got delayed beyond those 3 days.
Yeah.
It would have been a big deal to have to haul it back to the VAB and kind of go through the destacking and all that again.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're launched. We're heading towards the moon. Okay, we know our destination. We ran into a little situation with the docking of the command service module and the lunar module. In the official report, and I'm going to quote here, it was called failure to achieve docking probe engagement. And in fact, it took 6 attempts to successfully achieve capture latch engagement, I'm reading quotes here, between the CSM and the LM, the lunar module. If docking had not been completed successfully, would they have had to abort? Gerry, why don't we start with you?
Well, I guess you could have decided to go on to the moon and fly a command service module mission only, kind of a repeat that we would have had to build in real time, but you could have gone on to the moon and just not taken the LEM with you. That would have been a very bad situation, particularly falling right on the heels of Apollo 13, to have a failure or another one where you couldn't land. But I think we would have probably figured out something to not just abort and come home immediately, and maybe get something meaningful out of the flight. It's also it was an issue that I know all of us were really concerned that we weren't going to get it. And for the audience, maybe it's important to understand that the lunar module was carried behind the command and service module on the Saturn V, in that stack. And once we did translunar injection and started for the moon, then the command and service module separated, turned around, docked with the lunar module, and extracted it from that third stage of the Saturn V. So that's what we're talking about. It was that docking where we were trying to just hook the LEM to the front of the command and service module so we could extract it from the booster and go on to the moon. So if we hadn't done that, we never would have gotten the LEM out. And what happened is the probe has some capture latches. It's a probe and drogue system, and it has some capture latches that are kind of spring loaded and stick in a hole, and then you can't pull it back out. That's a soft dock, but at least you're connected. Then you pull the big clamps in and clamp it up tight, make the pressure seal, so forth. Fred can go into that in great detail because he knew a lot about it. But we had to do that, and on the 6th try, we actually never did get the capture latches to engage. What we had him do is he went and right up against it and then started a low thrust to thrust the vehicle into it. Then he fired the big latches, essentially, and fired the latches that really clamped the whole thing down, and it worked. When the probe, they actually brought back to Earth because you had to clear that out to get through the tunnel anyway. So figured out a way to get it home, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it. And the mission report said it was probably one of two things. It either wasn't cocked properly, but that later they kind of said, no, that's probably not it. Those latches had to be cocked, I guess, in a certain kind of way. They said it was probably contamination, that when Stu pushed and fired, that it knocked it loose or it came out or something, but they never found anything. So it was kind of a spooky failure, but the probe and drogue worked just fine after that. We had to use it again at the moon twice, and it worked just fine.
No, the only thing I'd add to that, that's pretty good, explains it. It was a great piloting job by Stu to nestle it in there as he did and do the thrusting to initially get the latches set. I think he was a little upset about it because I was happy to have it done, but there was a contest going on between the command module pilots of who would use the least amount of fuel to affect that docking and capture. And of course, Stu used a lot more fuel than he normally would have. So he wasn't very high in the running for minimum fuel use for a command module pilot.
Well, it sounds like on the carrier, in-flight refueling at night, and of course you needed to get fuel. That's why you needed to get that probe in there and connect up. So, well, and we all know how tough some of those things are, and I'll tell you, they really are. at the moon, okay, 14 gets to the moon. Some, minor little glitches. They end up with a lunar landing abort switch anomaly. In fact, it had to be reset 5 times, including 2 times after reading up on some new procedures from mission control. Fredo, from your standpoint, ever any thought they might not be able to land on the moon?
Yeah, certainly if they could not get around that switch, sending that discrete called abort to the computer, they could not go into P63, which was the landing top of the point where you went in the landing program, or it would immediately gone into an abort program. So they had to somehow get that switch out of the picture. And as you said, they reset it by Ed tapping on it. I think he tapped on it, and that made him think maybe there's a solder ball or something inside that switch, and that was making contact. And by tapping it, he freed it, but then it would drift and get back and make the contact again. So what they did was, with Draper Labs figuring it out, Don Isles, I think was the fellow's name, they invented a patch, if you will, which include manually keystroking into the disky, which was the keyboard, to in essence make the computer not look at the switch. I guess a simple way of putting it. So by Ed carefully keystroking in, and as I'm sure normally, as we always did with something that delicate, before you did any proceeds on any of those things, that both crewmen checked the data and made sure it was right, and to get it in, and of course that was successful, and they were able to bypass that switch and go directly into P63, and then affect the landing. Of course, the thing they had to worry about then, of course, is at any time downstream, they no longer could use that switch to do an abort. Obviously, it had a second switch called abort stage, but the abort button would no longer be operative. So they'd have to do a manual abort if they needed to do it on the way down.
Got it. It sounds like the old, procedure when something's not working, on-off switch to off, on-off switch back to on. And, I always try that first. So Jerry, down in Mission Control, this is all going on. What are you guys doing?
Well, again, here drew the short straw. I was the flight director on that landing. And I really thought that, good gosh, if we don't get this one done, now we're not going to be able to land. We'd already gotten past the docking thing. Pete Frank handled that one. And, but it was a serious problem. I thought it was interesting when Fred described it. Now, you're an airplane driver, so you've probably been asked, or you've done the same thing. The gauge didn't look right, so you tapped it. Very scientific troubleshooting. Just tap on it. And sure enough, it went out when they did. And then it came back on. They tried it again and got it off. And so I think when the Don Isles that Fred mentioned as a young engineer at Draper Labs, MIT, and they had built the computer and had written the software. So he was the guy, a young fella, that came up with this fix of these bunch of numbers that you could stroke into the keyboard, and it would make the computer ignore that switch. And so it was a good fix. And when I think about it now, of course, today we would have probably had 3 different ways to make sure that doesn't happen. But that was pretty grassroots stuff. Solder ball and a switch, and and that kind of thing. And they went back, I think, after that and looked at some other switches and other lunar modules that were on the ground, and found that the quality wasn't as good as it should have been. So they fixed it up. But that was a close one, and that could have kept us from landing.
Yeah, you over there with the soldering iron, we need to ramp it up just a bit. Okay, so eventually Apollo 14's lunar module successfully lands on the moon. on February 5th. The landing site, the Framoro Highlands, was the original site for Apollo 13. Fred, tell us about that site.
Well, as I earlier mentioned, it was a hilly area. It was the first landing proposed out of the Mars, which is relatively smooth, but we saw both on 11 and 12. There's no place that's actually really smooth on the moon, because there's rocks of various sizes from smaller craters all over the place, where Neil had to readjust where he landed. And to a little degree, I think Pete, not as much on Pete Conrad on 12. But it was still a hilly area, and that was the first time we were going to go into that. And we knew there'd be quite a bit of debris. We, in spite of knowing the debris, we did not have aerial from the orbiter photographs of a resolution to really know. I forget what size rock you could see down to, but there were rocks much bigger than what you knew they were going to be there. And of course, we were worried about that, because we were going to land at the foot of this crater that had been hit by a meteorite. So we knew a lot of stuff was going to be thrown out of it. So it was a little bit uncertainty in that sense of also with that landing site. But it was meant to land near the base where it had leveled out a little bit from that crater, and to really then follow through with the primary EVA on the second one, to explore the front flank, go right up that hill to the crater, which turned out to be a little tougher job than also anybody figured it might be.
No, I'm totally sure of that. So Jerry, you know, down in Mission Control, you know, everybody's talking about the geologically Okay, Ruben. Okay, so everybody's, you know, down in Mission Control talking about the geological significance of this particular point, like Fred is describing. So what's going on in Mission Control during this time, and talk down there trying to maybe get someone to, you know, the astronauts to focus on a particular area?
Well, I think Mission Control, of course, is involved in two things. One is we were watching out for the status of the backpacks that the guys were wearing out on. And that was our primary responsibility. When you think about it, inside the mission control room itself was the systems, and we were still looking after the lunar module too, although nobody was in it, but we were monitoring its systems to the best that we could. So we were making a number of calls every once in a while about their backpack to do something maybe, and we had a little signal with them that we called it, that was called the PLIS, PLSS, Portable Life Support System. And sometimes the docs would say, hey, their heart rates are getting up to about 150, 160, and we'd say, hey, how about a PLIS check? And that meant to slow down, but it had a purpose. They would read out their reading of O2 and water and that kind of thing and it was kind of a code to slow down. I think when they were going up Cone Crater at that steepest part, and it got really steep, I think Al was up in the 160 range heartbeats per minute. Ed was 150, something like that. They were huffing and puffing. That was hard work. And the surgeons never were, I don't think they were frightened or anything like that, and I know I kept an eye on it just to kind of see how they were doing. And, you know, they would stop and their heart rates would immediately slow down. It was just hard. It was like working out in a gym, I guess. And the other thing, then, as I mentioned earlier, we did have a science back room. And if I'm not mistaken, I think by this time, I think Lovell was actually in charge of that room. And he had guys like Lee Silver and Gordy Swan from the USGS and Bill Muhlberger from the University of Texas, all these famous geologists in that room. And Jim was the one that kind of collected their thoughts and translated it into something he could talk to the CAPCOM about or talk to the flight director about and see if he could get them to do something maybe a little off their flight plan. But as I said earlier, by and large, these guys knew what they were doing. They knew where they were going. They knew what they were looking for. And they had the little MET, the modular equipment transporter called the rickshaw. That Fred could probably give you a lot about how it was in training. And they put samples on that thing. They had tools. They ended up, I think, kind of at the end of that steepest part of Cone Crater. They were actually carrying it. They picked it up and just brought it along with them, trying to struggle up that hill.
Yeah, it turned out to be not the help they thought, because again, the terrain wasn't smooth, rocks all over the place. So that, again, it would tend to turn over, hitting on one side on a rock. And so they were fighting it part of the time going up that slope, which added to the workload.
Yeah.
It, instead of a help, it only for short times did it appear to be a help. It was mainly a hindrance to have that rickshaw to tug along.
Fred, the one thing I always thought was kind of cool about it, though, is we could see the tracks, and we knew they knew how to get back to the lunar module because it was real clear where those tracks ran.
Yeah.
So if they had to get back in a hurry, they wouldn't have to figure out which way to go.
Yeah, they did not. They got just about. I don't know. Somebody figured out how far they were from the lip. I actually was concerned a little bit. They don't get too close to that lip because we carried a lanyard, each of us. So if one of the astronauts, partner fell into a smaller crater, we could toss this lanyard down that he could hook up to his suit and we could help tug him out. Cone Crater was a lot deeper than that. So if somebody went in that crater, they're going to be there a while. So it didn't bother me they didn't get right to the edge because we didn't know, how sturdy that would be. And Ed, I know, got frustrated because he knew they were close. And he called me a bad name. He called me a fink.
A fink. I remember that.
Had to push him, with Mr. Crow wanting to push him to get started back to the limb because of the consumables and the backpack.
Yeah.
So anyway, they were a little frustrated. Ed particularly was frustrated. He didn't get to the rim. I assume just to have at least a look down into the crater. But
I just saw a piece somewhere in something that the best estimate is they got within somewhere between 50 to 75 feet of the lip. So they were close. Yeah. And they said the sampling was probably as good there as it was at the lip. So in spite of what Ed thought.
Well, okay. So first of all, I'm going to take Lee Silver on this mining ghost town tour.
Yeah,
for sure. He's on my list now. And now that I'm going to ask a question of the Fink, which I didn't know that you had a nickname, Fredo, because, and this is a little more of what you're discussing, during Al and, Ed's 2 EVAs lasted 9 hours and 20 plus minutes. They collected 94 pounds of moon rocks, including Big Bertha, the 3rd largest moon rock ever retrieved. Fred, a little more about that, because this whole topic of picking up these moon rocks, like you said, they were working pretty hard. And what were you talking about that wasn't the rickshaw wasn't quite working as they expected? Well,
it was supposed to be something you just hold and tug behind you, which Jerry said carried equipment of various sorts. You could put your samples you collected in a center section to stow, and when you don't have. And it's a 2-wheel vehicle, so you're holding onto a handle. So when you're hitting all these rocks scattered all over the place, it would tend to tip over. I don't know, maybe it did tip over or dump some stuff out at times and slow them up, but it was just added workload. As far as the rock sampled, I think I earlier said that the intent was to sample that area because it was thought to be the fallout from the Imbrium Basin, the big, very large, dark area to the north of that region. And this was supposed to be splash material that had come out of that large crater when a very big meteorite had hit eons ago. It turned out some of the rocks were breccia rocks. Breccias are rocks that have been broken apart, and then through the heat of the event, in that case, the meteorite impact eons, billions of years ago, had and melted, had reformed together, and they found those sorts of rocks, which led them to believe, convinced that it came out of the Imbrium Basin. The age dating that was done on these rocks, they collected, I don't know if all of them were, but at least there was at least one sample they age dated. It was the oldest rock ever collected on any of the missions. So it's older than any other sample, and it may have been more than one, that were collected on all the landing missions in Apollo.
Wow.
So I'd say at least it was convincing to some degree that the rocks they were getting had come, and that whole hillock area had been formed from the debris coming out of the Imbrium Basin.
Well, it had to be very exciting. And so Jerry, you know, in Mission Control, when they run across this one that they now call Big Bertha, was there any, they find something this large, do they, you know, and you're listening to the conversation, you know, do they, you know, oh my God, look at this one, you know, that kind of thing?
Well, we didn't have the coverage of TV that you would have liked to have had when they were going up Cone Crater, for instance. We couldn't see them because they were too far from the lunar module. Later, when we had the rover on the later missions, we had a television camera so we could see them. So we just had to listen to what they were saying, and it not having the visual didn't make it real dynamic to hear, but I always thought when they got excited about picking up something, my first thought was pick that sucker up and get it back, you know, and it turned out to be a great find, Big Bertha, and the every mission had one of those. I can remember 15 was, Fred helped me, was it a plagioclase that is another kind of,
Yep.
and that was that real white rock that Scott picked up, I think, or maybe it was Jim Irwin, and you know, everybody was yahoo. Yeah, no, the science guys were all happy. Those of us in the control center didn't know the geology quite as well as those guys in the back room did. So
Right.
we couldn't get quite as excited over a plagioclase versus a breccia, and but they all sounded neat, and
No,
at least we knew where they came from. That's what I could feel.
I think Big Bertha was just probably they figured it was the largest rock that they rationally could take back. I'm sure there were a lot of rocks like all these sites had rocks much bigger than that. In fact, later you'll see in later missions they're standing up to rocks that are bigger than the people standing by the rock.
Oh yeah.
So I think Big Bertha was just one that had good crystalline look to it, and that was probably about as big a size as they figured they could fit and bring home. And so that's why it was picked up and called Big Bertha. But I'm sure there were many other Big Berthas that were bigger available around that area.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm sure Callaway Golf would say they have the real Big Bertha. So
Yeah, there you go.
okay, so we can take a break here. Okay, we can continue on. We can, you know, we've been going over, you know, for just about an hour now. I would suspect 45 minutes to an hour tomorrow. Then he's going to edit it, and we're going to look at whether or not we want to do it in 2 segments or a single segment when we air it, you know, on Friday. So I will give the 2 of you the call. We could continue on a little bit, or we can hit it again tomorrow on time, and it's probably 1 more hour, I would guess. Ruben, how are things? Because Ruben's listening here.
They're going good. Either way, it's up to them whether they want to do today or tomorrow.
Well, I had a long session Saturday. I'm kind of getting to hear it in my voice.
Right.
I did a thing for the National Space Society, God, I never did think that thing was going to end. But I'm willing to do whatever Fred wants to do. Fred's got the more.
I'm still, my schedule is okay for the Mora too, so I can do it either way. I'm clear now. My caregiver's here to 4 in the afternoon, which is
Okay.
two West Coast.
Well,
So-
why don't we do it tomorrow?
I can do it either way, tomorrow or continue today, either way.
Okay, let's do it tomorrow.
Okay.
And
12:30.
yep, we'll be back same time. And I think it's going great. Ruben, you're our judge.
Yeah, it's really good. I think it's going good.
All the topics are
Here you go. As soon as you close your door, then I'll go to the FedEx.
It's Jim.
Hello. It's been a heck of a morning. I don't know why. So how are you?
Good. There was traffic this morning.
Yeah, there actually was. I was
I think it looked like there was an accident on the 163 when I came in.
okay. So Ruben, you're going to have to tell me, and Jerry looks good, of course, but if I get the lighting the same as it was yesterday.
It looks a little different than yesterday. For some reason, you're. Let me see. You bring up yesterday's video. Hold on.
Okay.
Ruben, it's probably because there's not as much light coming through his windows because we're overcast.
Oh, that's right.
That could be.
Let me
Now I
just-
can adjust these lights. Okay. I was over more.
Yeah,
Like
that's better. That's cool.
Right?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me see.
'Cause, you
Oh
know,
yeah, it's right. David's right. It's because there was a lot more
Ambient light.
ambient
light
light.
coming.
Right.
and then you need to shift your camera slightly, rotate it. Yeah, keep going. Keep there.
Jerry, do you need us here for this?
Well, Griffin is, he's meticulous in all his stuff. He called me and said, "Hey, I need to remind you to wear the same shirt." Okay, let me see. I got the same shirt. I can't hear you, Jer.
No.
And you're unmuted. We
Is the
still
mic
don't
plugged in?
have you. How's the lighting, Ruben?
Yours is good.
That good right there?
Yep. Looks pretty
Okay.
close to yesterday.
And Jerry, I know you're listening, even though you're not talking to us. The interview was great this morning.
No, it's not coming in.
Still no joy. No joy, by the way, boys, is a term used in aviation when you have no communications. You would say, "I'm no
Okay,
joy."
what do you got?
There we go.
Got in?
There you go. Good.
Okay. I plugged and unplugged.
What's that?
I pulled the breaker and put it back. I pulled it out and plugged it back in.
Well, remember my phrase: on-off switch to off, on-off
Uh-huh.
switch back to on.
All right, I'm on. Do you hear me?
We
Yes,
can.
sir.
We hear you. We don't see you yet, Fred.
Well, let me check if I got a start video. There we go.
There you are.
There we are. Put it to full screen.
Yeah, a little better lighting than yesterday, even.
What happened there? I went to full screen. There it is. Okay. Full screen. There we are. Okay. Yeah, see, you keep your two helmets handy back there.
I do.
Noticed those yesterday. One's pretty
Yeah.
fancy there.
Well, that's so I got a flight suit there. That's so every so often I could just put it all on and then I start making noises and I pretend I'm flying around, right?
All right. Here, come here, Tito. Get in. Let me get him in here for you. He's scratching on the door. 'Cause
What a cutie.
he wants
Yeah.
to join the show here. Get over here, Tito.
Well, you know, we've got, I hate to admit this, we've got 3 dogs at home. We had 4. We lost my favorite about 5-6 months ago, Bodie. And so I think we're all unfortunately slaves to our pets.
Yeah. Yeah, the ultimate is I watch a lot of this Living Below Zero, a National Geographic show about people in Alaska. This one guy's a
Yeah.
musher, and he has 17 dogs that he has to take care of. And he's all
17.
they sleep with him. I mean, they all come in this cabin or wherever, in his tent, wherever. If it's real cold outside, he puts straw down from the lay on, but if it's too cold, they come in the tent with him. They got 17 dogs with him.
So what's his show? I haven't heard of the show.
Life
Oh,
below zero.
Living Below Zero. It's on National Geographic Channel.
Wow, I'll have to look at it. My brother was an Army helicopter pilot and actually spent over 20 years up in Alaska.
Okay, yeah, and this basically covers 4 groups of people. One's a grandmother, lives all alone right at the top of Alaska, has an airport, single runway. Airplanes come in to refuel, and she actually has a number of not cabins, they're like almost railroad cars. And you can find it online. It's KAVIK, K-A-V-I-K. I think it's $800 and some a night if you want to stay. But people go up there to hunt and fish, and of course you got to fly in. But she's all alone up there, stays through the winter sometimes.
She was hunting a moose. She was hunting a moose last night.
Right, yeah. She gets a question is, can she get a quota of meat? Either the moose or the caribou who come through. If she can kill 4 caribou. So if she can stock her freezer enough food, she'll stay through the winter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, my brother picked up the hunting and fishing that I did not pick up. Our grandfather was Washington State Sportsman of the Year twice. And not just for the hunting and fishing, but also in those days, setting up all the laws and the rules and, how many days can you hunt doe, versus, bucks and, all that kind of stuff. And so I went up for my Eagle Scout Board of Review in Olympia, Washington at the state capitol. And the head of this Board of Review was the Chief Justice for the state of Washington. And so I walked into his office, and of course, everybody there looked like Teddy Roosevelt. It was those days. And the first question he asked me, and this is no joke, he says, "Are you Emmett Kidrick's son?" And I go, "No, sir, I'm his grandson." He didn't want to talk to me. He just said, "Where's your dad?" And because my dad was waiting outside, and I was done. He didn't want to talk to. Excuse me. He didn't want to talk to some young guy. He wanted to talk to somebody who, knew who he knew very well. So my dad picked it up. My brother, of course, has hunted everything you can imagine in all those years in Alaska, and fished and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yep, that's either boats and planes is the way you get around Alaska.
Yep. The famous de Havilland Beaver.
Right.
Great
Piper
airplane.
Super Cub.
Yep.
Tundra tires. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so we don't need an introduction. We're just going to pick up where we were. We'll end today with a few questions talking about your 2 views of the future. Okay, because you're both studied on the topic. You stay very dialed in, and I really mean that when I say it. And I think a lot of people, are constantly wondering, not just how, but when do we really get back into space? We had a little bit of a lapse, and I'm not trying to make any political statement here, but certainly with the last president, space was very important again, I believe. And I think that aspirationally, we have established some wonderful goals. Let me turn off my phone so it doesn't ring, because Ruben gets really upset with me.
Incidentally, I'm tying up with your chairman on a radio show also on Thursday.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So he's going to help promote, I guess, do some promotion too for the show and the donations.
Good. Well, yeah, that was with Mark.
Yeah, right with
Yeah,
Mark.
yeah. I communicated with Mark, and he was just saying how things going. And of course, I told him, I said, unfortunately, we don't have much to work with, but we're doing our best.
Doing the best with what you got.
Excuse me.
I kept looking this morning trying to get it. I finally got it at the end to insert something about the museum, because
Right.
the guy wanted to talk all about Apollo,
Right.
Apollo 14. So I finally, at the end, I perjured myself and told him you were a good guy. And I thought they'd say, well, but Jerry, you're the legend. And what they said was, that Jim Kidrick is really special. That's a quote, that Jim Kidrick. So that's the last time I'm going to try to set that up.
Well, was the nose growing at the same time? Was it?
I
Going
couldn't see him, so I don't
That's-
know. Yeah.
Okay, so excuse me. Want to make sure my radio voice is plenty clear.
Right.
Okay. At the moon, Apollo 14 experienced intermittent communication problems between the command and service modules, and because of a problem with the high gain antenna. But communicating between mission control and the command and service modules, you were able to continue communicating successfully. Were there lessons learned from previous missions like Apollo 11 that helped communications going from mission control, Jerry?
Well, we had the high gain, which was a steerable antenna that locked on and tracked and did that kind of thing. So it was automatic and pointed right at us. But then we had what we called omni antennas, and they were fixed, that were around the circumference of the spacecraft. And so by selecting the right omni, which there was a guy in the control center could tell us which omni would be best depending on his attitude. And we would have Stu, or in other, we had the same problem in other missions. 16, I think we had a serious high gain issue, didn't drive in yaw or something. And we ended up sticking pretty much to the omnis. The omni antenna didn't give you quite as much gain, so TV pictures weren't as good or something like that. But the comm was okay as long as you stayed on the right omni. The spacecraft was always moving with respect to the Earth in some direction, so that omni would start to get out of sight and on the back side of the spacecraft. So we'd have to have him select another one. But I don't think it was a big issue. It just was a nagging one that we had to stay up with. That's the way I
Fred,
remember it. Fred, do you remember it any differently?
No, I don't recall having any added problem to. You just had to have your people with the like Ed Findell.
Inco.
With the comm people keep up on what omni and tell the crew to switch if they didn't to the right omni to regain high bit rate and voice.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, maybe talk just a little bit about how important communications are when you're out there. When you were out there on 13 and, Jerry's back there in mission control and things are, you had, some major challenges. And, I think not everyone appreciates how important communications can be.
Well, we could not have gotten back without communications. We had, for instance, when the command module died, that computer is the only computer that had any navigation capability, which I would say was not as good as what mission control could provide with tracking data. And of course, when this happened, we were not on a path that would have gotten us back to Earth. So we'd have never figured out what to do as far as using the engines to get us back in the right direction. Same way as we went around the moon, the maneuvers we did then to further refine our path But also we did a lot of off-nominal procedures of various sorts. And of course, those had to be manually read up, and we would copy them to then execute whatever it was the next workaround. So yeah, we critically needed communication.
Well, I like that term, workaround. You were doing a lot of those.
A lot of those, yes.
A lot of those. Okay, so we get to 14 and we have splashdown and post-flight quarantine. And of course it successfully came down in the South Pacific on February 9th, today. Since we are recording this for a later broadcast, maybe I shouldn't say, that splashdown occurred on February 9. Ruben, you'll take care of that. One of the anomalies of the crew of 14 was that they were the only Apollo crew quarantined before and after. Was there any sense at NASA after the success of 14 that it was a mission, and this is a good one for both of you, that saved the Apollo program after 13, that 14 had to be a success?
Well, I'll say that certainly if they'd had us another failure, there's no question the program would have been in jeopardy, because I think frankly, the administration and the world at large felt we had achieved the goal that was set out by President Kennedy of landing on the moon before the decade. So if you want to call it the key objective and promise had been done. Now the only people that were obviously championing for further missions were the scientists and geologists. They of course really would have liked to go on all the way through to Apollo 20, which was originally scheduled to get more landing areas researched and samples collected. But it would have been a concern had Apollo 14 not been able to land or had a serious problem. I think quite possibly with the sort of tone down of the national fervor and even already budget cuts coming, that they could have curtailed the program right there.
Gerry, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Fred's right. There was a similar situation, although more dire, I think, even between the fire, Apollo 1, and the first manned flight, Apollo 7. Had 7 not worked, it was a very critical mission to the program, but it did, and it allowed us to go on. This one may not have been quite as severe. I don't think we would have lost the crew or anything like that, but I think a failure, just as Fred put it, just a failure on top of 13. You stack those two together back to back, I think it very likely could have ended the program. That's severe. Remember, Vietnam was still hot, campus unrest, still very hot here in civil rights movement and all, and rioting, and the country was diverted anyway. And if we'd had a failure like that, I think we could have lost the program.
Well, and that's a great topic. You've actually segued into our kind of next. Here we have the time frame of the mission. And by the way, Fred, you made me think of, and Gerry, you have 7 that was so important. 14 is so important. Maybe it was good we didn't get to 21. Okay, that we were starting to deal in 7s there. And okay, so you've talked about the unrest, and here we've got the space program kind of slogging its way, to the moon, and in a very, very good way. Having grown up during those years, certainly I remember how important I think the space program was. But maybe from your perspective, Gerry, a little bit, and Fred, realizing that this was a high point. This was something we as a nation and even as a world could look at and say, you know what, we're still going places no matter what the unrest was at the time.
I've thought about that after Apollo ended. I kind of went back and thought about the the whole thing that we went through. And I think we gave the American people for sure, and maybe even the world, these little glimpses. Every time we flew a mission, there were glimpses of something that was going on that was good. And it allowed the people to be proud and that sort of thing in a way where they could all think together. You know, it's funny in a way, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, but we were so darn busy inside that control center, and I know the astronauts were too, for those years, that we missed a lot of it. You know, I had a twin brother in Vietnam for a year while we were messing with spacecraft, and I didn't miss it totally, but I was so busy that I couldn't communicate with him very much, and all we had were letters anyway. But it was a kind of an interesting time. We were a little bit insulated from it, and as a result, we were not as aware, I'm sure, as the general public on how rough things were going inside the country. I was aware of it. It wasn't that. It's just that I wasn't living it every day because I was living the space program every day, and I couldn't get my couldn't devote that time to it. But it was an interesting time, and I think the American space program really was those little glimpses every time we flew. And particularly we got to those J missions, and they kind of started reeling off in a nice way. I think those were good times for the U.S.
Fred?
No, Jerry hit it pretty well. Certainly, well, we were busy. I went through 4 missions back to back, starting with 8, then 11, then 13, then 16. And, you know, I similarly did not pay much attention to the outside world. A lot of people ask me, we were thinking about what the Russians were doing, or what we were, and I never thought about the Russians. It was just, we had our own thing to do, and we were charging as hard as we could to get the work done and get ready for the next mission, is the way I was involved. These were intense in a way, time-wise, beyond what people realize. Certainly 8 and 11, which were when we were still on every 2-month launch cycle. Basically, within the last 6 weeks toward launch, we literally went to 7 days a week. And it went from like you climb in a simulator maybe at 8 in the morning, and you'd have the last meeting ending at about 10 at night. So that was the kind of pressure and at least in the training schedules we were involved with for those missions in particular. It eased up a little bit on 13, and it was quite relaxed on 16. But again, same way, about the last month before launch on 16, we were back to about 7 days a week, feeling what we needed to get done to get really ready. So it was that kind of a work environment, and you just didn't have time much to read newspapers or watch TV, any news. You just worried about what you were having to get done to get ready.
Well, it reminds me very much of that military work ethic that both of you, of course, had conquered way before that. I thought, Jerry, when you said letters from Vietnam, the old days of being on cruise, when you numbered your letters, you numbered the envelope, right, so they wouldn't read, letter 8, before they read letter 6. Right. And, the different ways of communicating. And certainly, I remember our 84-85 cruise on the USS Carl Vinson. We spent 107 continuous days in the Indian Ocean, and very similar to exactly what you're talking about. Every day you got up, you were still on the ship. And I always compared it to a Twilight Zone episode, that sooner or later you thought this is the way life was going to be forever. And I'm sure in the space program, for you guys, for literally years, okay, more than 107 days, every day was hard work with great team members. So,
Jim, that brings up a point that how important our spouses were, for those of us that had families and kids. They worked as hard as we did. You know, the spouses took care of the bank accounts and the kids and the bills and it was, I didn't get to see many Little League games or anything like that, Cub Scout or Girl Scout meetings. And, but it was really important how, and of course we were all young and we probably couldn't get them to do it now, but but in those days it was kind of natural that you just jumped in and got it done. But very important pieces of our lives for those of us that had families.
Fred, I know you agree with that. You two were very lucky to have, you know, certainly wonderful partners. And I think you're absolutely correct. It's critical in life, and it really helped a lot. And well, I start to get a little misty every so often when we think of some of those days, because, you know, one of the things, Fredo, maybe you can comment on this. You know, Gerry just mentioned kind of, you guys were young, you know, and I've always said you guys were kind of young guns out there making a significant difference. And it was kind of cool.
Well, I certainly didn't look at myself in that regard. You know, I got where I got to just following sort of a path that fit the bill to be a part of the program. You know, I'd obviously grown up as a military pilot in aviation, and a couple of Marine fighter squadrons, and then worked for NASA as a test pilot for 7 years, testing airplanes to sort of make me qualifiable to go into the program. So what I was getting into the space program was similar, but obviously much bigger with a lot more people involved. And I was more involved in the development of the vehicles. The flight testing we did, except for like the X-15 program, which was a whole new machine. We normally took existing airplanes in the aircraft test program and modified them to test some new feature. But I was not involved in the actually early development and later in the shuttle, even the design of a new vehicle. So it was kind of an added thing in my career from the astronaut office days in that respect. But no, I didn't really look at myself as a young gun. I knew it was an honor and a privileged position that not many people got involved. In fact, even today, if you look at the world at large, there's not many, counting Russians and us and everybody else, there's not many people who've gotten to go to space.
Right.
Still a pretty small number.
Yep.
So it still is a pretty small group overall.
Okay, so, you know, we get 14, 15, 16, and 17 under our belt. NASA, you know, transitions to the Apollo Soyuz program, Skylab, Space Shuttle. Talk a little bit about that transition, you know, to these other programs and what you were seeing at NASA as it related perhaps to some of the goals. In other words, now we're going to, you know, get the International Space Station. We're going to have a continuous presence in space. And what did that mean at NASA for during that time?
Well, I'll take a crack at that. As soon as the Apollo program ended, I was beckoned to Washington to head up legislative affairs for the agency. Now that's a Texas A&M engineer dealing with the Congress, which sounds a little funny. I was the first, by the way, I was the first guy to ever have that job that was not
Well, they didn't know what to think of an Aggie.
That's right. I knew the Senate was over here and the House was over there, you know, that kind of thing. Right. But they wanted to get somebody up there that, and this was George Lowe, who was deputy administrator at the time. He wanted to get somebody to help him that understood the technical side of the story, that could explain what we were going to try to do with the shuttle. And at that point, Skylab had already been envisioned. using spare hardware from Apollo. And so it was kind of going on. ASTP was kind of in the background. It had already been talked about too, but it came later. It came in 75. But that period from 72 to 74 was really intense, trying to save the shuttle in the Congress. Walter Mondale, Senator, brought up a resolution to kill it in 1971, as early as 71. And it got defeated by 1 vote. So it was close that it almost got pulled from appropriations. That's why they got worried about trying to get the shuttle going. So that's all I did for that 4 years I was in Washington, was work on the shuttle. And of course, that in that time we reeled off Skylab, which went well, except for the launch of the lab, and it kept everybody engaged. I think those programs were kind of bridge programs to get to the shuttle. And at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Fred, because Fred was very active in the early shuttle program and flew those approach and landing tests at Edwards that were so important. But the agency, let's not make any mistakes. It was a signal we were going to be in Earth orbit for a long time. We were not going back to deep space for some period.
Fred, talk a little bit about that shuttle. That had to be pretty exciting.
Well, I went at it from a different tangent than Jerry. When I finished the Apollo 16 assignment, I was thinking at that time of trying to get into program management. And I talked to Deke, and then I talked to Chris Kraft, and they arranged, one of them, probably Chris, arranged for me to get a slot in the Program for Management Development course at Harvard Business School. And I went off for 4 months for that, and came back, and I was worked as an assignment working for Aaron Cohen, who was at that time the program manager for the development of the orbiter, which was probably 85% of the complexity of the space shuttle system, and to develop that vehicle. And I actually moved to left the astronaut office and went to building 1 on the 4th floor, and joined Aaron for the next 4 years through a shuttle development. In fact, my first assignment, I worked on the evaluation team to evaluate the 4 proposals that came in from 4 contractors to build the shuttle. So I was involved in the selection process that picked Rockwell to build it, and then went off through some of the challenging times in the orbiter office, where, unlike Apollo at its early days, we started suffering with budget cuts below our program plan and contract from the start for the first several years. And so we were weighing with things to take cost out of the program to try to preserve schedule, which is what you always try to do. And at the same time, if we're any flight vehicle, we were suffering with weight growth. So it's kind of a 2-pronged set of things. It was interesting and challenging to go through that to try to keep it online. And so I stayed in the orbiter office. I ran the what's called the ops team through the design reviews, through critical design review on Enterprise, which I later flew, and through a preliminary design review on Columbia, which was to be the first orbital vehicle. And working on the ops crew with me, you're reviewing the design. Basically, your job is to review the design at those points, and the documentation and engineering drawings or whatever's available, and write discrepancies. They're called RIDs, review item discrepancies, on the design. And the team I worked with were obviously some people from mission control, some of our training people, some other astronauts that were on this ops team to critique the design as we went along to getting it ready to actually get to the point of cutting metal and building it factually. And that was about the time where we were in the first of the manufacturing process. I was lucky enough to get named as one of the 2 crews that were designated to fly the very first orbiter, Enterprise, which didn't have that name. I forget the name it had, but the Trekkies wrote a whole bunch of letters into White House or whatever, and they actually effectively changed the name to Enterprise. And that was all done at Palmdale, California, Plant 42, where a lot of the aerospace companies are. And a hangar there where I think down the line at the same time, Rockwell was where Bella had been building the B-1 bomber, and another hangar down the line. And so I went to work then now through the early buildup of that vehicle. And through the testing, we did system testing, much like I'd done on the Lunar module at Grumman back in the Apollo days, to get it ready to overland, cart it over to Edwards to get ready to fly on top of the 747. So that was interesting, challenging times as well. One of the big problems we had was the 4 computer redundant set. There was they'd flown we looked at other programs that tried that. One in Canada, a helicopter program, in fact, which had a real bad problem. And we had difficulty getting the 4 computers to work together. They kept voting each other out. In fact, we almost got to the point of saying, we're just gonna forget it because we got to make the flight schedule. We'll go fly single string, 1 primary, 1 backup string. When IBM, who was the software developer for that system, showed up with V19 or V20, one of those software update loads, and that solidified the set. From there on, the computers hung together and did their thing. And so we finished testing, moved it to Edwards, and got ready to fly. Now they flew a number of unmanned flights with Enterprise on top with the 747. Fitz Fulton, Tom McMurtry with the primary crew. And they were really testing that vehicle, which had mods, structural mods to support Enterprise attached on top. And added 2 fins, added fins on the horizontal stabilizer, more worrying about almost a double failure with their stability augmentation system, the SAS. But anyway, those were added. And so they flew a several flight test program just with the carrier. Now, it was interesting times too when we got ready to launch the first time. This was in 1977, and we had changed presidents, kind of similar to where we are today. We had this, and it the shuttle kind of had the label of it was President Nixon's program. And at this point, President Jimmy Carter had come in. And it was kind of worrisome because in the debates and whatever leading up to election, there had not been a lot of discussion about space. So it wasn't clear where Jimmy Carter stood, although we had hopes because he was an engineer, although more nuclear engineer, but hoped he'd have somewhat of an affection for aerospace. And but he quickly, shortly after office, canceled the B-1 bomber program, which made us secondarily nervous, even though that's not NASA. So we're getting ready to fly this flight. And at the same time, NASA had announced a major slip in the orbital schedule for Columbia, mainly due to the tile problem that had surfaced. So that was in the background. And it was interesting, the day I got ready to fly that flight, I would have to say I was much more nervous than I was on Apollo 13. Frankly, not for my safety, because Gardo Fullerton, who flew this mission with me, this flight with me, test flight, we both were sitting in ejection seats. So, you know, you got, that's a pretty good plan B. And, but I actually worried about the carrier crew, Fitz Fulton, Skip McMurtry, Guidry, Skip Guidry was another one. Tom McMurtry was, Skip Guidry, and poor fellow was also, and they were a 4 crew in the 747. I knew they could not escape. If the flight control was not as promised and as we'd seen in engineering simulations and in our simulations, including the Gulfstream aircraft. Possibly it could go, because we tuned it highly to have a good pilot rating with the gains. If it went completely unstable and I didn't get fast enough to the backup system, we could have gone out of control momentarily, because that's the first time we're going to get to see it, was when we separated, how it really worked. And we could have damaged the 747 and that crew would have not been able to get out. So that was my concern as far as any injury or risk, was more for the 747 crew.
Well,
But
you know,
the secondary risk was programmatic.
right.
That I feared had we damaged or lost Enterprise at that point with that looming slip in the orbital schedule, possibly President Carter may have canceled the probe. And so that was the secondary real concern for me at that point, reflected by the ground crew. When Gordo and I climbed aboard that morning, there were two Polaroid pictures on the side of the ladder as we climbed up to get into our ejection seats of these figures in blue flight suits like we were wearing, our helmets on with the visor down and oxygen masks dangling so you couldn't tell who they are. They're sitting on huge sweepers in a hangar that looked like sweeping city streets, big city streets. The saying there said, if you screw this up, this is your next job.
Well,
So the workers felt a little fear of that problem with the program as well.
well, you know, we also inducted, you know, Fritz into the International Air and Space Hall of Fame here in San Diego, and he was Mr. 747, you know, for the shuttle testing. He was
Right.
he was certainly a real pro. So Jerry, when all this is going on, you're back in DC trying to make sure all these programs are going forward and changing of presidents and all that kind of stuff. And you know, did you get in front of Carter or any of those guys at the time?
Yeah, actually, I left Washington in '76 and went to Edwards as the deputy director of the center at Dryden, now Armstrong Research Center. And of course, we were getting ready for the ALT, the approach and landing test that Fred's been talking about. It was a busy time, and interesting thing, we flew the first ALT flight, and they asked me if I would go to, nicely, if I would go to the Kennedy Space Center and be deputy director there, and which I did in 1977, later in the year, and it turned out that I was there through the first shuttle flight, and Jimmy Carter came to see us, and actually he was delightful. He has, as Fred alluded to, he was a nuclear engineer, so he understood the difficulty that we were doing, and I think I never sensed that he was being, kind of maybe looking at us with a jaundiced eye. I think he was really interested in it. So maybe that's why, Fred, maybe that's why he didn't cancel it and let it go on. And he was, I saw him one other time after that, and down at, in fact, it was at the Cape, and he was right in there. So I guess somebody convinced him that you don't have to give it all the money in the world, but don't kill it. And
Well,
and
even
by
in
the
the
way, to circle back to your initial question, during this period, we were so focused on getting the shuttle in orbit and get it flying that there was no, at least in the halls I walked, there was no mention of a space station yet. We just didn't have the bandwidth to even think about it. And the first orbiter that they delivered to the Cape, I was deputy director then, went out and saw it. That was Columbia, that was brought in there on a 747. And if you've ever seen a dog with the mange, that's kind of what he looked like. The tiles had come off in flight, trying to get it across the country. They had stopped where, from El Paso or somewhere, and I think they actually had duct taped areas of the leading edge of the nose, in the nose area, and it looked pitiful, and they had to essentially retile it at the Cape, and they figured out how to get them to stay on. And so it was a tough time, tough development, and what an amazing machine it turned out to be. Flew 135 times, and it was the first time we had reused anything in manned space flight for sure. That orbiter really came through.
Well, now they've got all those special glues and alien tape and Gorilla Glue, you know, where was it when we really needed it?
That's right.
Well, you know, Fred, I've always said, I'm going to ask you for a second here, that the shuttle was maybe the greatest glider ever built. And what was it like bringing that thing in? Because, you know, it was flying almost profiles that for us in naval aviation were, you know, high speed emergency procedure, you know, where you had a locked throttle and you're going to shoot the entire approach between 190 and 210 knots. And it had to be exciting.
Well, it was a glider. It was actually a pretty good glider, roughly lift to drag similar to the X-15, about 4.5. And I say for us, just thinking of the other vehicles like the lifting bodies, which didn't have wings, it was a pretty good glider. And surprisingly, when we separated, the control system flew better than, from a handling quality standpoint, than anything I'd seen in all the simulations, engineering simulations and training I had seen. So that was a marvelous, happy moment. We did lose one computer right at separation. It quit, gave us a big X on the screen, and Gardo missed about the first minute of the flight, pulling circuit breakers and whatever to definitely kill that computer so it didn't pollute the others. And on the way down, the missions were short. I think the longest one was 5 minutes and 21 seconds from the time we released to you landed. Gardo had a famous quip at the first debriefing. He said, "This is definitely not a program you want to build up your flight time on."
I like that. I like that. And by the way, you know, when you were mentioning the name Enterprise, you know, and, you know, all the Trekkies, you know, writing in, and you got to remember there was a Navy aircraft carrier named Enterprise too.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
In fact, there were ships before that with sails that were
Right.
Enterprise. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, so let's talk a little bit of philosophy. Okay. You know, we talk about the moon, we talk about Mars, you know, deep space. You know, Gerry, you mentioned, you know, because, you know, I've been around enough of you guys over the years that there are some that feel the International Space Station, we've kind of languished, you know, in low Earth orbit, and we haven't gotten back out to where we really, really want to be. So the two of you, you know, this is your opportunity to talk about, you know, where you think we ought to be going. You can even drop a timeline, you know, moon, Mars, moon, you know, wherever it is, a little bit of free form here for you two.
Well, I think we're on with Artemis. Actually, I think we're on the right track. It's a bit of a shame that it's been so long since we've been out of further with humans than low Earth orbit, but it is what it is, so we have to accept it. If we can get back on track here now, the world, according to Gerry Griffin, would be that the right thing to do is to go back to the moon first, and then on to Mars, and then ? Because I have a theory that we need to learn how to move around in deep space, because I don't know when, 5,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, 20,000 years from now, who knows, we're going to use up this planet. And I don't mean global warming. I mean, we're just going to use it up. And if we want the species to survive, we need to learn how to move around in deep space and find somewhere else for it to survive. So that's the very, very long, long view. And we've just, with Apollo, we took this little bitty step. And with Artemis, even if we could get it eventually in some form to Mars, that's still a small step. I'm talking about big distances. We've got to learn how to do that, in my estimation. We go back to the moon first and establish some kind of permanent habitat so we can learn how to do that. We've never done that, and it needs to be done. So we can figure out how to do that at Mars maybe better than we would if trying to go directly to Mars now. So I think we're on the right track. I think the Artemis strategy is right. Now, whether we can fund it and keep it going, I don't know. That's going to be the big question. And it's going to be the big question of this administration, because it's all at a critical point right now. Fred and I looked at one version of the lander down in Houston, 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago now. And it's pretty slick, but they got to have money to build it. And the Orion spacecraft, the command module, if you will, of Artemis is pretty far along. It looks pretty good already. It looks like a command module on steroids. It's bigger. And but I think we're going in the right direction. It's not going to be easy, and it may get delayed. I just wish NASA could get some consistent funding, like Fred was talking about a while ago. When you start cutting program budgets and running it up and down and up and down, guess what? It's gonna run the cost up, and we can't afford that. But just give NASA a level playing field, and then we work in the commercial side that brings their money to the table and their know-how. They're doing good. And my last point on this, so it doesn't turn into a filibuster, is that I think what we're going to see in the next 10 years is we're going to see the low Earth orbit domain, really the domain of the commercial people, the SpaceX's and the Blue Origins and others, the CST-100 that Boeing's building and so forth. And then that's going to leave NASA to think deep. Let those guys provide the transportation. NASA can buy rides as they need them. They're going to stay in, they're going to do things in low Earth orbit. They got to get to the space station. They got to do other things in low Earth orbit. But let them ride. They will buy their seats just like they do on American Airlines to get from inside the Beltway to LA. And that will leave NASA to think deep and think onto the moon and back to Mars. So I think we're doing okay if we can hold it.
So you would say we're go for landing.
You would go for landing.
Go for landing. Fred.
Well, Artemis is you call it the first step. What Jerry's alluding to is eventually to have a base, and there is a learning curve. And if you created this permanent base, if you will, on the moon, which is actually simpler to get to and fro than Mars, say, is to learn the logistic requirements to support it, much like bases we've had on Antarctica, which do require resupply every year, change out of people, those kinds of things. So there's kind of a learning curve on this, call it stay permanently. And it's actually a sort of a transitional facet in the front end to get that permanent establishment done. So that's kind of the lessons learned that has to go through initially, well, be it on the moon or be it on Mars. I would hope somewhere where you get to do a little better on inventing a new propulsion system to make it a little quicker getting to and from Mars in some way than it currently takes. In the bigger picture, of course, Jerry alluded to is the things we have to worry about here on Earth with the human race, not just outgrowing it, but we have a threat of meteorites, meteorites, comets that I guess Rusty Schweigert championed that for years. Rusty flew Apollo 9 and actually it's a society formed and have a website that they say there's no question eventually we're going to get hit by another major meteorite. So you might say in different ways the human race is at risk, at large. And so it behooves us to try, at least make that breakthrough. I hope there is and speaking of breakthroughs, I hope there's a breakthrough of either the elements, assets, whatever that are available either on the moon or Mars that will again trigger the power of the commercial world to want to mine it or whatever, something that will be the driver that will provide the continuum of funding and support to move outward. And with that is kind of the backbone of that support, which is strong, as you know, to make the next dollar is something that's makes people energetic about doing. And hopefully that will also spawn that further development to establish the permanent base eventually on Mars. Of course, philosophically, it's always the wonderment, and we creatures are unique in that way, at least on Earth, to think about what's it all about. You know, we have billions and billions of galaxies. Each would have hundreds of millions of stars like our sun, not exactly like our sun, but similar, some similar. That is kind of interesting to continually search outward with optical and different wavelength devices to look what's all about, what the Creator has set up that we're a part of, only a very small part of with our solar system. But there's also a hope of a continuing of just thinking and continuing slowly, not to our individual satisfactions as we talk here today, because we're not going to be around long enough. We only have short lifetimes, and so we can't think. Gerry talked 20,000 years. Let's talk 100 million years.
Yeah.
Hopefully the human race still around by then. Where are we then? So there's a hope for this continuum at whatever level can be supported and funding. And that's always, there's times that's always going to be a challenge.
Well, and certainly Hubble's given us a look at what appears to be infinite. You could just keep on going, and you know, who knows what you're going to never run into. And Gerry, your comment about, and I always call it cadence. You know, I think the funding for NASA provides a cadence for them, so they can, you know, get their mojo going, you know, and that we can, you know, we don't have interruptions, you know, in the program. And by the way, you know, with what you just said, Fred, maybe it's the finding of gold on Mars. Okay, that will heck with water. We'll figure the water out.
Right.
We just want to get some gold. Now, okay, so the UAE, China, and the United States, we got stuff landed on Mars this month. This is kind of you know, the space world, deep space exploration and penetration, you know, is huge. And so touch on that just for a second, the two of you, but also you know, when you look at SpaceX and Blue Origin, and you know, Bezos has been a little bit quiet lately, but you know, I think he's got big plans. He's changed his position at Amazon a little bit, so maybe our deliveries will slow down for, you know, but you know, it really is an exciting period to see all of this start to come together. And well, like I said, Mars and then the gang.
And what you just said about China and other countries, India and UAE, they're all in this game. We're not in this alone anymore. We were kind of there for a while with the Russians. That was kind of it. The Japanese are right in there. And so it's still a competitive field. I really think space, I think we proved it in Apollo. It's an instrument of foreign policy, can be, and I think they who get there first, not only prestige, not just the prestige of doing things first, it's the accomplishment and the learning that they get out of it. We tend to learn and share. The other countries don't do that. They learn and hold it tight. So I think I'm glad to see those other countries in there. I think we do better when we have a competitive nature, and Neil Armstrong called it a threat. He said we do best when we have a threat, and Apollo, we certainly had that. But I think this is good. I don't begrudge them at all. I'm not so sure I try to sound like the good sport and wish them well. Yeah, I do. I don't want anybody to get hurt. But if they don't fill their objectives, it's not gonna affect me too much.
Well, we all remember the George Patton speech. Americans love a winner,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I think that is that competitive spirit. Fred, the commercial gang, the activity that's, Mars is probably going, if there's anybody alive on Mars, they're probably going, we're being invaded. And so what do you think?
Well, there's three missions imminently, I guess, approaching Mars. Again, I'm not sure. I hope they find gold, but otherwise they have instrumentation that's again searching for life. Has there been life on Mars, even at a microbe level, but also water, which is obviously a very essential thing to have. Any major discoveries on those accords might be a big spark of interest to move further in that direction, to move faster than the pace we're on today by any one of these parties.
Well, that's great. Okay, so now we're going to delve deep into your memories. Okay, you both have a tremendous number of certainly friends, fellow professionals who have made this good stuff happen. I'm going to ask you each, what is the moment that you remember most? We always say that life is kind of made up of moments, and so when you look at that moment for you, and maybe even if we talk about what you remember in the past and what will be the moment in the future, for those next greatest generations, the kids, because I tell them space is just going to be so exciting. But what's the moment?
You're talking about in space, in space activities.
Well, I guess. Well, here, could you put Sandy on for a second?
Well, I can remember a moment that set me. I think what I would say, I can do this. When I got to NASA in 1964, I had some experience with the Agena spacecraft in Sunnyvale, California, which was at that time was the upper stage on a number of spy satellites in the very early 1960s. We put several of those into the Pacific Ocean early, but we got better later on. So when I got to NASA, they really wanted me to be an Agena expert, because that was going to be the target vehicle that we docked with in the Gemini program. I got to Houston. I was there about less than 30 days. And Arnie Aldrich, a guy that Fred knows well, remembers, came to me and said, would you consider being a Gemini flight controller? And I thought to myself, don't throw me in that briar patch, because I leaped so fast, because that's what I wanted to. I wanted to be on the man side early on. And that moment, I knew that I had a chance. But it was about a month later in a simulation in the Mercury Control Center on GT2, Gemini Titan II was an unmanned test flight. And it was my first time on console. And I did a simulation, and I turned around to debrief, and I was no further than 6 or 8 feet from Chris Kraft. And when I looked into his face and I debriefed what I had done and so forth, and so, and I never will forget it, he looked and he didn't say anything. He just nodded and smiled. I knew I had it made. And that moment started my career in mission control. But
Wow.
I tell you what, this just to look at Chris Kraft in a control center, I'd heard about him for several years and turn around and look at him. I thought, my God, my voice got about an octave higher, but he liked what he saw, and I could tell he liked what he heard. So.
Wow. Well, it reminds me of the great comedian Rodney Dangerfield. He said every so often, and I'll do this, you need one of your buddies from across the room to give you that old, you're doing okay, kid.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that moment. So
Yeah.
Fredo.
Well, I was trying to wrestle through my mind the memories, think of, quote, that best and most memorable event. And it really, I had many of them, and both in and out of the program and younger. Probably the one that was most life-changing, clearly the most life-changing, was during the Korean War when I joined in the Naval Aviation as a cadet training program. And the first, and you have to realize that the time I joined up, I was more interested in getting a commission, which my dad said I should strive for, rather than flying airplanes, because I'd never, ever been in an airplane in my life to that time, not even sitting on the ground. So the first day after finishing pre-flight and at Whiting Field, I met the instructor. Hank Chenard was the Navy lieutenant, was my initial instructor. And Hank showed me how to get out to the flight line, and the SNJs, some of them engines were running. Now, the airplane looked big to me, and the SNJ, it was a big airplane, and make all that noise they were making, some of them already engines running. And so we helped me climb aboard, made sure I got hooked in right and the parachute on right and everything. And the first time we got airborne, that was it. It was really like I don't know, call it. I don't know how to describe it. It's like magic or whatever. When I can now look at the Earth from not too high, really above. Maybe that day we got up to 5,000 feet, maybe. But to see the scenery and that from that aspect and be flying through the air, it was just magical. And that's when I decided. I wasn't quite sure. I was on the course through 2 years of college to be a journalist. And so that day that changed everything. That day I said, my career is going to be in aviation. I wasn't sure what the career was going to be ultimately, but I said, I'm no longer a journalist. Now it's going to be flying airplanes. So that was the day I'd say was probably most momentous and most life-changing for me.
Well, let me tell you, for both of you, those are two phenomenal moments because they were game changing, they were career changing, they were life changing, and I'll tell you, we want to thank you both, okay, for coming on with us today. Maybe we can do this again in the future, especially as we continue on into deep space exploration. But on behalf certainly of the Air and Space Museum, all of the people who will view today and who appreciate what you've done for us, we always like to say here at the Air and Space Museum, we want to be an organization that connects the dots, but we also want to be part of the vision of the future. And so I applaud both of you because I think you fit that image. I think you were there, you made great things happen, and you are thinking about and focusing on the future. Now I'm gonna kind of close it out with that for me, but if either of you or both would like to say something, you've got an awful lot of fans out there, and let me tell you, I salute both of you, and thanks for being our friends.
Well, I will say on a serious note that I think San Diego Air and Space Museum does probably one of the finest jobs in the whole country on not only presenting history, but also using the educational aspects. Your education department just does a fantastic job. And at the same time, Fred has Infinity, the Science Center, that is outstanding. I just wish we could get out of this pandemic, Fred, so you could get the doors open again and get going. But I think you guys are making a difference, and I salute you for that.
No, my feeling about museums is that they offer an opportunity for obviously adults, but I was more interested in Infinity as part of the raising the money to build it and get it running for the sake of the children. I look at it as a stealth learning experience because they come and they can touch things, hear about things, and have fun. And they have a fun day at the museum, and without realizing that they learn things that stick with them, because there are amazing things they see and do, and so it makes a real impression. And I hope in some cases steers them into a career, maybe along the lines of some of the things they see in museums. But in any case, I think that's what museums provide for children, which obviously is very important because that's our future.
It is. Well, we agree. We have a sign out front that says "Enter for fun," and while they're having fun, we can educate the living daylights out of all of them. You know, but if they're and I tell this story all the time. I said, if someone says, "Hey, do you want to go somewhere with me?" The response is, "Well, are we going to have fun?" And so if we can get that fun equation down, okay, the rest of it is kind of easy. And I have to tell you, you two make it just so wonderful for us. And I just can't express enough how much we appreciate your friendship, what you've accomplished, and the visions that you give. Like I said, I've always said, because my parents were the greatest generation, okay, that World War II grouping. And we have to believe that there are future greatest generations, because that's really what makes us do what we do. So
Thank you.
I will tell you, thank you. And you don't have to sign up. I can't say enough good things, seriously, and how much it's appreciated. And, maybe in a few months we'll do something again, because, stuff is going to keep happening in this space thing. And maybe we'll get together and talk about, all that's going on at Mars right now, that kind of stuff.
Well, maybe you've already given it to Fred, but where do I send my invoice? Is that? Uh-oh.
I have it right here.
Did you lose COM?
Well, because Fredo mentioned it a bit, we're closed. I mean, literally, I told our staff, we have our staff meeting